Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to IRMS Public Sector's February event. In one moment, I'm going to hand over to Scott Sammons, who is our sorry, somebody's just come to the door, which is a bit distracting. Sorry, Mark, we started. Can you shut the door, please? I'm really sorry about that. It's typical, isn't it? I do apologise. Right, let's start again. Good afternoon and welcome to IRMS Public Sector's February event. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to Scott Sammons, who's our speaker for the day. Only for an hour. I expect he could speak about this for the whole day, but you know, he has been given the boundary of an hour for today. For those of you who don't know who the disembodied voice is, I'm Elizabeth Barber and I'm chair of IRMS Public Sector, and along with my colleague Sarah Graham, who looks after all the technical and the communications and all the things that need to be done to get Livestorm events up and running. We run IRMS Public Sector as a team. So a huge thank you to Sarah for everything she does to get Livestorm up and running. So just one housekeeping item. We would ask that if you have questions, if you could put them in the questions tab, because it's easier for Sarah to pick those out, and then she will pose the questions to Scott. I know I don't have to say this to you because you're all very professional people, but just if we can make sure that the chat stays constructive and professional, so that we can answer questions as and when needed. In answer to some of the questions, which I'm sure that we will have, Scott has already made the presentations available, and he will tell you how to access those later on, and we will be recording, and this will go on the YouTube channel, hopefully with the doorbell ringing and having gone from the beginning, whoever's editing it. So without more ado, I'm going to hand over to Scott, who will introduce himself and begin the presentation. So over to you, Scott.
Thank you very much. Just in the process of fixing the link, it looks like Livestorm converts part of the link into a symbol, which is really annoying. So the link doesn't appear to be working, and that would be why. In which case, then, it'll be shared afterwards. Let me see if I can try it again. Don't do that. No, it's done the same thing again. It's turned one of them into a link or into a little smiley. That's what that little red B is, which is then breaking the link. So in that case, then it will go around afterwards. Not important. It's just a copy of the slides anyway. Hello, everyone. My name's Scott Sammons, and welcome to this session on all things AI. Or like I put on social media yesterday, my idiot's guide to AI, because I'm an idiot and I managed to understand it. So what I'm going to take you through, or let me start with a little disclaimer first of all. First of all, there's going to be loads of references to films, modern day understandings of AIs, references from AI in the press and other such things. And they're very much there for your educational use. Nothing in here will be considered legal advice. I am also not a robot. So if you were wondering, I'm very much not a robot. And if our new robot AI overlords are watching and listening in, and indeed learning, then Kaya, lovely to see you. Let's make the presentation bigger. That's better. So what I'm going to take you through is setting the scene about some context to what this thing called AI is, how it works. So some of the basics of the things you need to consider and the things that can go wrong. And what does that mean? Why am I bothered about it? What is the point? What is this? What is that? What is the other? We'll have some questions at the end, but as Elizabeth said, if you want to put questions as we're going through, ones that are relevant to something we're talking about at that particular point, I'll see if I can answer as we go through as well. So, my name's Scott Sammons. I am an information governance practitioner. I have been for a little while now, and I've started to get involved in AI because I was thrown into the deep end. Got involved with a project doing it, and I've had to learn bits and pieces about it as I've gone along. So very similar to a lot of us. So when Elizabeth said, would I mind breaking down what is AI in my usual standard. I was like, yeah, all right then, this is good. This will be good for a laugh, and this will be some fun. Let's see if we can break this down into some basic things to be aware of, things to do, and etc., etc. So if you do struggle with it and you want to learn more, then there's some details in the link about who I am and what I do. So let's look at some background. Cortana in the news. Now I'm picking on Cortana for this because that's been the most recent one in the press. So there are lots of versions of AI knocking around, but Cortana I'm picking on because most of us will use Microsoft Office in one way or another. So it's a name that you're probably the most familiar with. For those of you that don't know, Cortana was originally the made-up fantasy AI in the Halo series of games run by Microsoft. And because she became quite well-renowned as one of the many AIs in the Halo world, Microsoft then took her and made their AI, their voice assistant, on their phones and in other systems and named her as Cortana. Others you've probably heard of include Alexa, Siri, Google. So Google's one is just called Hey Google, which is a nice neutral name, I suppose. But ultimately, Cortana is the same as the rest of them. A program that responds to random user commands and presents you with content that you have given it access to in one form or another. Now, one of the things that we were, funny enough, talking about with me, Sarah, and Elizabeth just now, was that a lot of people still see AI as robotics, or AI as this thing, a human robot, a thing that will mimic a human being, that can do funky dances, go up and down stairs, can respond to you, all those sorts of things. So when you talk about AI in a business context, people will often think one thing rather than the other, whereas actually AI is quite wide-ranging. And AI is actually here already. There's quite a few people that will still think that AI is a long way off. You know, this artificial intelligence, having, you know, computer or whatever within what we do and how we do it is still a long, long, long way off. Well, actually, it's closer than you think, and it's in a lot of things that you think. So there are a lot of branches to what AI is. A lot of things that use the concept of AI or machine learning as another branch of it is to do and to see. So I remember when I was first back in IG, back in or in-house back in 2009, that sort of time. Speech to text, text to speech, that was probably one of the first sort of systems that made its way into the average working office. Was things where you could record something and it would convert it into a piece of text, or the other way around. That was using some basic principles of artificial intelligence. It would take the recording, convert the recording into text, or the other way around. You get a lot of things that are built on that do like translation services and things like that, the same sort of thing. You have things around translation services, classification. There's talking about using AI and things like that for file classifications, for records management. We've had things around, so image recognition, facial recognition, that's been in place for a little while now, and that's starting to grow a little bit more. We've done analytics. And you might have heard of the phrase, if this, then that sort of programming. They're all elements, branches, bits of the jigsaw, if you like, of this wider umbrella of artificial intelligence, where a system, a program is doing something based on what we've told it to do, or indeed what it has learnt to do. So machine learning, as another concept as part of AI, has been coming for a while now. So do you all remember Clippy way back when you had your Microsoft Office 1998? Was it? I think it was. Or was it 95? One of the two. Clippy. he would pop up in your Word document and he would then respond based on what you were doing. So very simple things. So if, for example, you included the word CV or dear whoever, and it looked like a letter, he'd then do a little tap on your screen and say, hello, it looks like you're writing a letter. Would you like to do this? Would you like to do that? Would you like to do the other? So some relatively harmless versions of recognition and AI have been around for a while now. Clippy being one of the eldest in our frontline related stuff. And I was really hoping when Microsoft announced that they were bringing in things like Cortana and things like that, they would bring back Clippy and that Clippy would be their AI front face. But that hasn't happened. That's a real shame. But fundamentally, excuse me, I've got a cough at the moment. It's not COVID. I've been tested twice, but it is nonetheless a really annoying cough. Fundamentally, machine learning is the ability to spot behavior and present options based on that behavior. And it's kind of falls into two types. So machine learning is being used quite a lot for analytics, supporting processes, records management, that sort of thing. And it kind of falls into predominantly two types. What's known as supervised learning, where it allows you to collect data or produce a data output from a previous machine learning deployment. So if, for example, I deploy a machine or a piece of AI software to learn how my network works. So, for example, you get some really comprehensive cybersecurity programs that will learn your network. It won't make decisions. It will just sit there and watch. It'll watch about what is appropriate behavior, what sort of files do you send out, all those sorts of things. It'll gather that all in. It will then build a construct of you, your network, what is normal for your network. You can then say, right, you've gathered all that in, you've determined what's what and what's not. That's something structured, something that's not necessarily new, but is something that gives you a nice structured, this is this, that is that, that is the other. Unsupervised machine learning, however, is something where it's unknown. You don't know. It could give you a completely random output based on what you've told it, using it for things like that, the Google DeepMind stuff, plowing data into it to see what conclusions it draws, and almost not necessarily firing loose with it, but giving it a little bit more freeway to come to its own conclusions about X or Y or Z. So there's repeating stuff that's already been learned, the sort of structured, supervised stuff, and then there's the unsupervised stuff, the undiscovered country as to where this particular mind, if we're going to use that phrase, may or may not go. Now, if you've got Cortana in your systems, and Cortana's there right now, so if we pick Cortana as an example, for those of you that have Microsoft Office installed, she's there and she's there right now. She can access anything and everything in Microsoft 365. It's up to you and your level of licensing to then decide what you want to give her access to, whether you want to turn on or off those sorts of services, those BI related services and those daily digests and things like that that you get. But fundamentally, Cortana was designed to access all of it. Therefore, she can access your location data for those where you've got things on devices, your diary information, contacts, accounts, email presentations, all sorts. If it's in 365, it's fair game for any sort of analytics or any sort of machine-based learning that Cortana is capable of. So if you were to just deploy a bog standard 365 license, for example, then that's on by default. So lots of us saw, for example, about a year or no, less than a year ago now, when we started getting these analytics emails of this is your daily digest, this is your daily summary. You've done this. What about this email? You've forgotten this. Spend some time today. You've got a spare hour in your agenda. Take some time for yourself. All those sorts of things. Again, that was Cortana and the other BI related systems looking at the data that was in your Outlooks, your OneDrives, your whatever, to then say, you've not worked on this, you've done this, you've done that, you've done the other. Now that's not nice and light and fluffy for us end users, but that also has the potential for, what's the word I'm looking for? Misuse on the other side. Because if this system is essentially collecting in and storing metadata on what you do, how you do it, the frequency of how you do it, how long you spent on a document, how long you didn't spend on a document, what documents you've been accessing, how long you spend on email, appointments in your calendar, all those sorts of things, then without appropriate controls, that data can be misused. And indeed, that data, when it exists in other places, not just Office 365, has indeed been misused in the past. There was even calls when this was first announced for the ICO to update their employment practices guidance to take into account the fact that AI was taking leaps forward in an everyday employment context, to which the ICO shortly afterwards announced that they were indeed updating it. So there are a few things that are front and center. There are a few things as well that are also either here or coming down the line that will start to affect everyday organizations. So for example, Google has announced in its Pixel smartphones that it will allow users to measure their heart rates and breathing rates using the camera. AI will use computer-based vision to reuse the sensor data that's already there, so stuff that's already in the phone, to be able to pick up X or Y or Z. So if you've got either on your own devices or on workplace devices, that's now a new purpose, something that wasn't necessarily there before, but now has the potential to pull in directly breathing and heart rate data. So that's something that you may want to turn off, want to turn on. The world is your proverbial oyster. If you've ever been to Milton Keynes and some parts of around the country as well, there are things that Ocado, like companies like Ocado, that are using robots to deliver packages to you. In Hounslow in London, the Independent ran a report or run a news story on the fact that they were using robots to deliver care packages, pharmacy orders, things like that. Things where we've relied on staff or employees to deliver things in the past, they were now using robots for. They could do it in a 60-mile radius, so it could cover, well, if I'm in Essex, 60 miles covers a large part of Essex. They call this particular system cargo. I do love some of the names they come up with. But again, that was another example of AI in the traditional robot sense is being used to deliver packages to specific individuals rather than just your food order. Now it can be used for more sensitive things, medical supplies, care supplies, those sorts of things. There have been reports that even the US government has been using artificial intelligence pilots to fly military planes. Around end of last year, again, the Independent ran with a news story that AI had become so advanced from a military point of view that it was being used to fly an aircraft. I can't even fly an aircraft. I can barely drive a car, let alone drive an entire aircraft. So the more that AI advances from a militaristic and governmental point of view, the more it advances in other areas as well. A lot of the machine learning things that we use from a records management point of view, from a Cortana and 365 point of view, all get driven by advances that happen from a militaristic government point of view. There's also been lots of examples over a period of time where things have gone wrong. We all remember the mutant algorithm that caused the exam results issue back in last year, in July, August time of last year. That was a good golden example of how AI is dependent on, and our use of analytics is dependent on good quality data and good quality algorithms, robust algorithms. And AI is basically a combination of data and algorithms. And even if you take yourself all the way back to the first series of automotive industry back when I think Henry Ford created the first production line, his words were rubbish in, rubbish out. And it's exactly the same with machine learning, exactly the same with AI, which presents us with problems, presents us with challenges. Some of them are operational, some of them are things we can fix, and some of them are fundamental things that we need to talk about, and that British society or the world as a whole needs to come to a conclusion on as to what it wants to do with AI use. So, for example, in the UK, the Surveillance Camera Commissioner has raised this several times, that the British public has never had a conversation, has never had a discussion about how far it will accept facial recognition and the use of CCTV in public spaces. There's been some little consultations done. The Surveillance Camera Commissioner has done some work. There have been some other organisations like Big Brother Watch that has done the same thing. But there's never been an actual conversation with the public en masse in the same level that we do other topics of our lives that have been talked about. So there have been lots of cases where the police, for example, have deployed facial recognition technology, even though it's fraught with problems, both operational and legalistic, and they have been challenged on it and successfully knocked back down again. Even to the point where, in an unprecedented way, the ICO even had to issue an opinion, a proactive opinion, on the use of facial recognition in law enforcement. A lot of the issues that are highlighted with things like facial recognition, where it takes a previously scanned image. So if, for example, if I wanted to build a program that would recognize Elizabeth in a crowd, as an example, I would take a photo of Elizabeth, marry that up with an AI that we programmed to scan Elizabeth's face, and then scan incoming images that it has access to and look for similarities. It would then spot where the similarities are and go, aha, this could be Elizabeth in X environment or X place. But again, it's looking for an algorithm because it's converted Elizabeth's face into an algorithm, into a set of data. That data is then looked for elsewhere. And if it's not decent enough, if it's not high quality enough, if the image itself that it's then looking at is not high quality enough either, it's going to do some guessing. In a report that I think it was Big Brother Watch produced, so it comes with a little bit of salt, is that they said that facial recognition technology has a less than 10% accuracy rate because, again, the quality of the image that it has access to often isn't very good either. Now, that's one of those problems that you can fix over time. So as cameras get better, as the images that it has access to, not only on Elizabeth's stored image, but also the cameras that follow Elizabeth around, that will get better. But that's not our only problems. Is it appropriate, for example, that a camera or an AI is able to track wherever you go and whatever you do? So even if you nip down to the shops in your best 90 because you think no one's looking and it doesn't really matter, is it then appropriate that a system has recorded that and is keeping records of that accordingly? In a report by PwC, that's put forward several cases and white papers for using technology to help with the provision of healthcare, using AI and other related technology to assist with diagnosis, to assist with operations. Rather than rely on the steady hand of a surgeon, you could rely on the solid hand of a robotic arm. Even to the point where the Department of Health and Social Care has produced updated guidance for producing digital and data-driven technologies, things that are designed to help with medical diagnosis and treatment, but have certain dependencies and challenges and problems. Even the ICO has produced guidance on the production of AI and the data protection related issues, and we're going to explore what some of those are in a moment. In the booklet that I'll send the corrected link round to, that Livestorm doesn't break, there'll be the links to all of these guidance in there as well. So don't worry about asking for the links, they'll all be there. So how does this work then? This is lovely, Scott. You've put the fear of God into me. You've got my attention. But how does this work then? What as a records manager, what should I be worried about? What should I be concerned about? Well, fundamentally, as a geek, I love this particular phrase. This summarizes the problems with AI perfectly for me. In the film Star Trek First Contact, the Borg Queen, the Borg race of cybernetic implants, is trying to get hold of a passcode from an android. And fundamentally, even though the android is the pinnacle of AI and seen as as close to human life as AI can get, even then the Borg say, well, fundamentally, you are an imperfect being. You were created by an imperfect being. Therefore, finding your weakness is only a matter of time. And for me, using machine learning technology, using AI, is riddled with challenges because our worlds, our data worlds, our analytics worlds, our records worlds, even our emotion and biases aren't perfect. It learns what we tell it to learn, or it learns what we've learned from our data. But our data wasn't perfect to begin with. So everything that we've learned, whether that was conscious or unconscious, it's going to learn as well. Unless we can change that. But unless is dependent on someone doing something. It's dependent on someone putting some sort of control in place, challenging an algorithm, really pulling it apart to say, is that appropriate that X equals Y equals Z? How does that work? The best analogy I can give you is when thinking of AI, machine learning, or if this then that, is to explain a basic process as if you were explaining it to an alien. So if you wanted an AI, for example, to make you a cup of tea, how would you explain making a cup of tea to someone that has never done it before, doesn't understand anything to do with what is a kitchen, what is a kettle, what is water, all of it? They know nothing. They're totally new to the world. How would you explain making a cup of tea to that person? How long would that process be? How are you dependent on other things? Even simple things like, will you go to the kitchen? Whose kitchen? Where? What is a kitchen? How would you recognize a kitchen from a living room or an office? How would you, or you pour it in the cup, you get a tea bag. Where did the tea bag come from? Who put it there? Who provided that? You wait until the water has boiled. Okay, well, in what sense? Is it a case of you wait for the thing to the beep to go off? What? So if you just think of a really simple process like making a cup of tea, getting a program to make that cup of tea for you is actually rather complicated because it knows nothing. You have to teach it everything. How to recognize a mug, how to recognize what liquid is milk, how much milk to put in. The ultimate question when making a cup of tea, do you put the bag in first or the milk in first? Even that point alone is quite controversial. Some people do it one way, some people do it the other. Variables, lots of variables, lots and lots of dependencies, and lots of places where it can go off on a tangent and get it wrong. It can go off on a tangent and get it right and perhaps do it in a better way, potentially, or go off in a tangent and throw the cup of tea at you, burning your face. So if you were to take a business process, something really, really simple, and something where people have tried to use AI in the past, and where this is coming up time and time again for using again now and trying to deploy now. And it's something that we all do, public, private sector, we all do recruitment. We all have recruitment-based challenges. We all have recruitment-based problems. So at the moment, put in your mind the problems and issues you have, or the organization has, with regards to recruitment, record keeping, data quality. Could you honestly say that your job description, for example, is a 100% accurate reflection of what you do and the skills required for your role? Or is it a case of that job description is, it's right, high level, gives you a sort of idea what you do, but day to day, not really. There was stuff in your CV that was definitely relevant, but there was stuff in your CV that wasn't relevant, but it's actually quite useful because you are doing that. Do your application forms, are they consistent? Where do they come from? Who designs them? Who controls them? What value do you give to CVs, covering letters, references? What scoring matrices do you have in place for interviews or pre-assessments if you've outsourced that pre-assessment part to someone like Capita or other? So all the challenges, issues and problems you've got at the moment about an employee doing this, and about poor quality job roles, rollout lines, all those sorts of things, there'll be exactly the same problems or challenges with regards to AI. But it's going to want you to fix them. It's going to want you to say, well, in order for me to determine, so if we imagine that I'm the AI for the moment, in order for the AI, to come to a conclusion as to whether this someone should be accepted through onto the next level or not, then I need information, I need data. I need the job description. I need keywords in there that I can then use to scan the application for. So if the job description says good communication skills, and you've put in the application good communication skills, I can match them up, and that equals a point. And the more points you get, the more prizes you get, until eventually you get over the threshold and it goes through. Lovely. But if you haven't put that, or we've said we're looking for a good communicator, and someone says, actually, I've got good people skills, which is essentially the same thing, do they lose a point? Does the AI know, or has the AI been programmed to associate one with the other? Or are we looking for one thing? Is it not on there, but actually we need communication skills as part of that particular progress or program? Do you give it 1 point? Do you give it 2? How does it work? So that matrix is dependent on a number of areas of data, a number of areas of dependables, a number of areas, other things that you're going to have to tightly control as well. Because if you don't tightly control it and someone creates a rubbish job description, for example, or a not great one, it then uses the matrix that you've come up with to assign value to certain things. You can see lots of scenarios where people are put through that probably shouldn't be, and some people that should have been put through aren't. So at the moment, where there's a degree of practicality with a recruitment process and a degree of human intuition, it's not the same with AI. It's dependent on things that we have to create to put into it so that it can learn from it. Even if it then learns and starts to develop something called intuition, it's still dependent on the quality of the stuff that we put in. And we all know that our recruitment processes, as an example, aren't perfect. There are lots of scenarios where it's a case, a little bit of a bodge job, and it does the job. It's never 100% perfect 100% of the time. Our recruitment data isn't perfect. Can you say in anywhere in your organization that your data is 100% perfect? It's reliable, it's robust, it's accurate, and it is kept that way through some good data governance and information management controls. It's just not possible. It just doesn't happen. So challenges that we currently face around, well, how do we create job descriptions? How do we score them? How do we score different courses, skills, qualifications, soft skills, account for learning over time? How do we also account for the machine's own learning? So at the moment, if, for example, we say, or over time, IRMS accreditation, for example, that's a big key thing. Its value has gone up. So where it was a point before, now it's a 5-pointer because it's a definite must-have. Now, we would agree that and control that. But if the AI was to do that, if the AI was to say, actually, I've learned over time that these words are associated with these words, therefore these words have certain value or the same sort of value as these words, how do you keep a record of that? The AI won't spit out an updated policy or procedure or process. It's now part of the program. So how do you keep a record for that? How do you account for how did it come to that conclusion? What did it do? Without getting the AI to explicitly create data to explain what it's done and why it's done it, it could then quite legitimately go off on a bit of a tangent. And you've then got to try and work out why on earth it went down that particular path. Was it right to go down that path and you just don't know what the reasons were? All those sorts of things. And he says, is this not covered by an audit trail? It should be, yes. But what's the assumption that you've made there, Andy, that an audit trail is built into it? Whereas for something like this, where you're talking about it evolving in its own way and it growing and learning in its own way, because that's the whole point of using it, is that it learns from what you tell it, is that you're working on the assumption that it will then give back to you what it's learned in a structured, auditable way. Whereas if it hasn't been designed to do that, hasn't been designed to kick back to you, this is the value of this, is the value of that, the only way you're going to be able to do an effective audit trail is to go back through the programming almost line by line. It's like the same sort of concept of like system design. In an ideal world, system design should be kept. We should keep a record of all the codes that we've used, version controlling, all those sorts of things. But I know lots of examples, some big examples, big national systems that have not done that. So when something happens, they then have to trawl through lines and lines and lines of code to work out where this one line is that's causing the entire system to go off into a little tangent with one thing or the other. So unless we've got some tight audit controls in place to keep a record of what line of code has been created, how the AI program has written a value of this and this and this equals this, therefore application Y equals X value, whatever it might be, then you're never going to know that without doing a complete debug and review of the code yourself. So where you've got issues today around data quality, rubbish in, rubbish out, your AI will only give you, your machine learning, your assisted predictive analytics, all those things we talked about earlier on, will only give you as good as what you've got. So if you haven't engaged yet in the art of data quality, worked out where your data is coming from, can you rely on it? Was it built for that purpose? All those sorts of things. Then again, you're going to have machine learning and predictive issues and challenges. So one of the areas for us as information records managers to become aware of is that as we move more towards our data being used in these sorts of environments, whether that's right or wrong, and for the minute the data protection concerns are going to come to those, just in terms of information and records management, one of the things that we have to start understanding is data quality. We look at it from the quality of our records. So does the record have everything that we need in it? Is it a good quality image? All those sorts of things. But from a data quality point of view, we need to work out, right, this data that's being used in this structured format, is it appropriate for this sort of use? Does it have limitations? Where did it come from? Is it appropriate to use in that environment? Has it been edited or changed in any way? Can I rely on it to do X or Y or Z? Which then raises this issue that comes up quite a lot around data bias. Often we'll say, yes, that data is reliable. It's good quality data. We got it directly from the source. Okay, fine. That's a fair, reasonable statement to make. But what was the source? Why was it asked for in the first place? What was the context upon which it was asked? Someone explained data bias to me in a very simple way. And so a lot of it is based on the language we use and where we've deployed it from in the first place. So for example, if I'm a police force, as an example, if I'm a police force, I've got two areas in my county that I can split the county up into up to, Area 1 and Area 2. I suspect that Area 1 will be more high in crime than Area 2, so I deploy 10 officers to Area 1, I deploy 1 officer for Area 2. The data I collect in will be much higher. Naturally, much higher. That doesn't mean in of itself that there is a problem in Area 1. All it means is that I've got 10 officers in Area 1 that are seeing more, watching more, aware of more. I cover more area. Therefore, my capture exposure is much higher, whereas that officer in Area 1 can't see everything. So there may well be the same levels of crime going on in both areas, but my data is telling me that Area 1 is worse for crime than Area 2. Now, I'll draw the conclusion that Area 1 is a dodgy crime area. Therefore, that's where I should go for certain things. Anyone born there, raised there, lives there, I will use that as a factor, as a negative factor, say it's a high crime area. I might use that to affect insurance, all those sorts of things. Whereas actually, that might not actually be the case. Because if I deployed my resources equally across all areas and the data was still higher there, because these 5 officers are doing very little and see very little, whereas these 5 officers see quite a lot, then I could reasonably say that, yes, this area is definitely more high in crime because the basic level variables are the same. Whereas at the moment, we can't say that. For operational reasons, legitimate operational reasons, years of data just not being at the forefront of how we deploy and build services, we can't say that. We can't say that this data is an accurate reflection of one thing or the other because we have, whether we were consciously aware of it or not, biased the data to deal with certain problems. So our focus has been entirely on this particular area, and other areas then don't get a look in. So you can't then reasonably say that that value is an absolute, because it's not. It's open to biases and other interpretations. So if we're going to get an AI to come along and take that as an absolute and then go off and make decisions about it, every decision that it ever makes is then also going to be biased, whether we've designed it that way purposefully or by accident. So the quality of data, or the practice of data quality, is to challenge that. Where did we get it from? Why was it there? Was this data built and collected with reuse in mind? Can it authentically be relied on? Is it robust enough? Can we challenge it and say with reasonable certainty that it is indeed an accurate and fair conclusion based on how it was collected and all those other dependables? If not, it's going to have problems and it's going to have challenges. Now, that scenario is oversimplifying the case, but that's basically some of the issues that we have around things like data bias and other things. There are other things that play a factor as well: the language we use, historical issues, legacy technology, all sorts of other things as well. But the fact is that data quality is a big dependable for AI and machine learning. So if we don't have things in place to handle these things, then again, rubbish in, rubbish out. Can our old systems do these things? The schools, for example, could they rely 100% on the capital education system? It wasn't built for these things. It has challenges. So is it able to do those sorts of things and produce that sort of data for such use? Even down to the SharePoint stuff, is that able to do it based on various other bits and pieces? When you then look at it through a data protection lens, is it fair and appropriate for someone to have their mortgage decision made by an AI and not by a human being? What sort of fairness and ethical questions does that raise? Is it a fair thing to do? With a member of staff, they're accountable to things like codes of practice, things like that. How do you embed a code of practice into an AI program? Comment from Sonia King says, if anyone is interested in data bias and ethics of using algorithms for data analysis, I'd really recommend Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neill. Very easy to read. Thank you, Sonia. There's a couple of books that I've been reading as well that are quite interesting as well. So I will mark that one down as one to read. Thank you, Sonia. I appreciate that. We currently say, for data protection reasons, data cannot be used for reuse. Principle 2. Just jumping back to principle 1 for a moment, because I forgot to mention transparency. How transparent can you be with someone about what an AI is doing when you don't even know yourself? If we're not sure what it's looking at, we don't know what it's doing about this or what's doing about the other, because again, it's really difficult to embed a code or write a code for a code of practice. Can we be truly transparent with someone about what we're doing? How can we stop Creepiness. So how can we limit the AI from not looking at certain things that it has access to? Don't look at that. You can't, that's not appropriate to collect. Yes, it's in that system, but you can't get that. What are the factors that we need to consider for determining what is indeed creepy or excessive and what isn't? The data quality issue comes around data accuracy, which we talked about before. But again, how do you correct it retrospectively? Do you go back and correct it? Do you then run the program again? How does that work? What about the records that it generates? How long do we keep those? Institutional memory, where we human beings often might forget who the person was, we still learn about the experience. AI only does that if you tell it to. So how does AI forget who you are, but still remember the learning of what it learned from your application? Separates the two out. How does that work? And again, the controls need to be put in place for that. What about security? There are lots of security concerns that can't start to kick in around AI if it's in a contained environment. Not. What happens if it breaks out and it becomes, you know, Skynet? That's being silly. But there are some security concerns to be aware of as well. And how do we be accountable to something if we, data protection officers and we records managers, don't understand what it is or how it works? So there's accountability stuff around policies, procedures, standards, keeping records of what we're doing and how we're doing it. But there's also some stuff for us as information and records managers as well, to be able to say that we're keeping up with technology. While paper is still a thing and will be for some time to come, the business is moving on into other areas. The organization is moving on into some other areas, whether we like it or not. So we're going to have to keep up with that. So how do we keep up with that? How do we keep evidence of that particular employee matrix, version controlling? How do we keep records of the decision that's been made, the factors that were considered? Where are those records kept? Do they form part of the AI's knowledge and learning itself, or are they separate? If they're separate, how are they produced? Because again, without appropriate controls, without these things being thought about and challenged and robust and written in, the AI won't build them itself. It only does what we tell it to do. Therefore, how do we keep those sorts of things? And how do we version control knowledge? For documents and things like that, we can control that. But how do we version control and software control AI? If it's evolving and learning all the time and changing all the time, how do you keep version control so that at any given point you can say, that application, it considered this, that application, it considered that? Your audit controls would have to be far more advanced than anything that we're used to as information and records managers. So what does all this mean then? Well, it's very much, AI is very much here. It has arrived. Whether it's basic machine learning, predictive analytics, algorithms, assisting with AI, with records management, or Cortana in Office 365, it is in your organization in some form. Therefore, we as information records managers need to start looking at it, understanding it. So we know that it's in Office 365. We know that with things like Dynamics, Cortana, BI, all those sorts of things, that they are starting to use this more and more and more. That they are, Microsoft 365 is gearing itself up or being developed all the time to support these sorts of tools and apparatus. So we need to understand how that works, and therefore what are the records management and information management challenges. Google Assistant and Google AI is being used quite a lot in a medical context. We've always seen the Google DeepMind stuff that's already there. Proofreading software is used quite a lot by a lot of organizations. That does the same thing. It reads your content and then gives you recommendations for changing the structure, the dialect, words, recommendations, those sorts of things. For those that use Gmail, Gmail has automatic software on it that will scan your emails and give you recommended phrases. So if you start saying yours, it will then recommend sincerely, all those sorts of things. That's being used right now. A system is scanning your email content to present you appropriate content to help you write that email. Lots of organizations are using predictive analytics for things like reoffending rates, health needs. It's being used in a COVID context as well. When I was talking to Elizabeth and Sarah just now, they were talking about how their organizations have been exploring things like assisted AI, predictive analytics, and those sorts of other things. System supported profiling. So it might not be the system that's making the decision, but it could actually be it's assisting staff to make the decision, presenting them with variables, warning flags, all those sorts of things to help with one thing or another. So it's evolving quickly, and some of it is obvious in your face, some of it not necessarily so. So I would encourage us as information records manager to learn more about data analytics, this concept of data insights, data governance, all those sorts of things. Melissa's put in a link to the Viva program, the Viva Insights that Microsoft are pushing, with a link in there about what it is. That's worth of keeping an eye on as well, and having a read of that, because that gives you a good example or a good overview of what the Viva system will do and the challenges it will have around your data protection and information records management stuff. We've talked before around getting more information on structured data rather than unstructured data, and this concept of data science. So if you do have within your organizations an analytics team, a data science team, IT, system, network engineers, architects, data architects, those sorts of people, get to know them. They will understand structured data and data architecture far more than we will, because it's not something that we've been necessarily been exposed to en masse. A lot of the content that we've looked at for the last however many years has been the unstructured stuff, whereas the world is very much moving to a point where it's now the structured stuff that might start to cause us problems. So understand and build relationships with people that within your own organization are indeed managing structured data. The links in the booklet that I'm going to send you have a link to the ICO AI guide, including an auditing framework that's currently in draft, but it's worth having a look through there. There's also a link to the NHS AI guide, the Government AI guide, and an AI forum that the FCA have set up as well. And while most of us aren't financial institutions, there's some really interesting stuff that's coming out of there. So that's worth a look at as well. Because again, it's all AI, whether it's a health context, a social care context, or whatever context, it's all AI. The problems are all very, very similar. So I wouldn't just focus on a particular set of guidance. I'd shop around, find what you can find, read the stuff, some of the books and recommendations that are in the list. And if we get more, I'll certainly encourage members to share them as well. Oh, thanks then, Melissa. No idea what any of that means, but thanks. I would also ask, again, as someone that used to volunteer for the Society and still does from an accreditation point of view, I would ask how the IRMS can help. What do you want to know more about? Can we facilitate things like structured learning? Should we be doing more with regards to advocacy in AI? We're already doing some stuff with Office 365 or with Microsoft. Is there more that you would want the Society to do in order to support your learning around AI and all those sorts of things? That's predominantly AI in a very, 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 very quick high-level summary of some of the basic things to consider, some of the challenges that are coming up, all those sorts of things. David says, in the comments, David says, one of my teams working heavily on managing and improving data quality. It is something to focus on. It's something we're going to have to do. Part of the reason why I've been learning about it and trying to find additional courses and qualifications on it, so I can learn more, because that's where everyone's going. That's where my clients are going. Therefore, I need to go there as well. Maria Lim says, what do you think about what's coming out now on the stats of success in AI, ML? Failures due to data quality, governance, DM. We don't seem to have learned much from RPA. Totally agree. We aren't moving on. We aren't learning from Rubbish in, rubbish out. It's one of the oldest lessons there ever since technology was first used to assist in one thing or another. We've still not learned from that. We're still making the same mistakes. Rubbish in, rubbish out. So for us as information records managers, yes, we've done loads of stuff around our unstructured stuff, and that's still problems. But the new horizon, the undiscovered country for us, is AI, machine learning, analytics, all those sorts of things. The structured data side to see what's what. That's everything AI, and in a nutshell. What I wanted to do, and what I know Elizabeth wanted to do with this as well, was to start this discussion going, to get the society talking about, and our profession talking about this, because it is something that's very much going to play a part in our futures. Therefore, what do you need? What would you like more information on? Let Elizabeth know. Let the rest of the society know. Shout from the rooftops, and they will look for what they can create and see what's what and what's not. Maria says, there's even a separation between data management and data science. Yes, there is, very much so. So I would encourage people to learn both and find out what the difference is, because people will say, oh, we're doing data management because we're doing data science. That's like a scientist saying they're doing records management, or they know all about records management. Do you really? Or are you doing it purely to meet your needs, not necessarily what the wider organization needs it to do? That's me.
Well, thank you very much for that, Scott. If anyone has got any other questions, we've got just a couple of minutes for any questions. So if anyone would like to put anything in the chat, or indeed in the questions tab, if anyone has any questions. And that was extremely interesting and presented in a very straightforward way. I mean, I've been to presentations on AI which have been quite complex and difficult to unpack. So we've got it today, all the information in a nutshell and presented in a very accessible way. So thank you very much to Scott for that. And as he said, my hope is that we can start this conversation running, because our organisation is already has already been talking about using AI for over a year for all sorts of different kinds of records management processes, as well as other things that are already ongoing in the organisation. So I think it's really important that we keep up with what's happening. So if anyone has got any questions, post them on the forum, on the website, put them on the blogs, or let Sarah or I know, and we will publicise things for you. But if no one's got any more questions, which it doesn't look as though there's anything else has popped up, it just leaves me to say a huge thank you to Scott for stepping up to the plate and presenting on what is quite a complicated subject. The groups, all of the IRMS groups, rely very heavily on the generosity of our speakers to share their time and expertise, and I'm especially grateful to Scott for agreeing to do this today. Our next event is exactly 4 weeks today, which is the 17th of March, and it will be Alan Shipman talking about records management and not digital preservation, but the evidential weight standards and how they fit into the records management environment, and details about that will appear in due course. And so it just forced me to say huge thank you to Scott, obviously, and thank you very much for attending and for your attention. And I hope to see some of you digitally again on March the 17th. And I hope everyone has a very pleasant afternoon.